London's burning. Shocking scenes of summer violence with central London's police cells full to the brim. The arson and looting spreads north. Why did what started as a peaceful protest erupt into madness and mayhem? Are there unseen social forces at work? Or is the police force not robust enough? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to Inside Story. I'm Stephen Cole. 5 British cities woke up to the charred debris of a third and worst night of major rioting. Hundreds have been arrested after another night of seemingly coordinated violence, including major incidents of looting and arson. The British Prime Minister and London's Mayor have both cut short their holidays and called crisis meetings. But as acts of destruction and chaos take over parts of Britain, is enough being done to put down the anger? Jackie Rowland reports.
As morning breaks after a third night of rioting, the full scale of the damage becomes clear. In Enfield, to the north of London, the UK warehouse for Sony is reduced to smoke and ashes. And to the south of the capital, in Croydon, people woke to burnt-out cars and smouldering buildings. For many here, it's as if their neighbourhood has turned into a war zone.
The looters had freedom to break into any shop around, left, right, they kicked it in, they will loot. Some of them were unable to carry so many things that they left it like as if they were waiting for a taxi to come and pick them up.
They were just teenagers. I think they're having fun, but for them it's fun, but for other people it's life. They shouldn't do that.
All through the night, London was burning. From the north to the south, the east to the west. Arsonists started infernos. Rioters vandalised businesses. And looters trashed shops. Smash and grab, leaving devastation behind them.
I don't know why people, oh my God. I don't know why people do this.
Anika Patel got a phone call telling her that the burglar alarm had gone off in her shop. She rushed there with her family, and these were the scenes that greeted them.
Drove down about 10 o'clock and there was about 50 people standing outside trying to get into our shop. Called the police about 4 or 5 times. They said they'll come. They still haven't come.
Faced with this onslaught on all fronts, the police have often looked outnumbered and overwhelmed. Now police commanders are responding to public criticism by increasing their forces on the ground. They say there will be up to 16,000 officers on duty in London during Tuesday.
We're having to move police officers around the place very quickly, and that stretched them. What we're trying to do today is to maximise the number of police officers that we can get out there, both from within the Met, but also getting them from outside forces, to really try and make sure that we don't have a repetition.
And in another worrying development for the British authorities, evidence that the violence is spreading beyond the capital. In Birmingham, in the English Midlands, more looting and more arson. And there were similar scenes in the northern city of Liverpool. Britain hasn't seen rioting like this for 30 years. Politicians talk about criminals and hooligans, but unhappiness over public spending cuts and tax rises have been smouldering for some time. And it's casting a pall over the government's declared aim to build a more inclusive society. Jackie Rowland for Inside Story in London.
The violence began in North London on August the 6th, following the death of a local man in a police incident. At first, there was a small protest about the death, but that quickly escalated. But have these riots been waiting to happen? And if so, why? Firstly, there is possibly a link related to the frustration of those in the most deprived communities. Government cuts and especially the withdrawal of education maintenance allowances. The new barrier of tuition fees and rising youth unemployment are all thought to be factors in the mix. Or is it all less complex than that? Simply bored young people out to steal and cause trouble because they think it's all a game. I'm joined on this by our guests in London, Kevin Craig, Managing Director of PR firm PLMR, Political Lobbying and Media Relations. Kevin was a former elected councillor in the London Borough of Lambeth and a former parliamentary candidate in 2005. From Pescara in Italy, Steve Parks, a security expert. Steve was a former Royal Protection Officer and a public order trained officer for the Metropolitan Police within 1980 riots in London. Gentlemen, the newspapers and the social media are asking important questions. Is what we are seeing criminality, i.e. simple greed and thuggishness, or are there deeper social issues at work? And quite separately, have the police been too willing to surrender the streets? Now, I'm going to come to that second question later, but let's go first to Steve Parks. And Steve, let's try and clear this one up straight away. Have we seen several nights of criminality at work, children playing, feral children at that, or are we seeing expressions of social injustice?
I think we're seeing expressions of social injustice on a scale that we've never seen before. It's unprecedented. I mean, if we go back to the 1980s, which is really all that this can be compared with, it's on a scale which is far higher than any riot that I was ever involved, whether that was the Blackwater farm in Tottenham, where Keith Blakelock was killed, or the Murdoch riots, even the Brixton riots. I don't think anything's going to compare to this because I think what we didn't have then was the communications. We didn't have the mobile phone network properly set up. We didn't have Facebook, and people didn't organise across the country quite like they can now. And they can mess the police about and together be a force to be reckoned with any constabulary up and down this country. If the Metropolitan Police in central London that control within the Greater London area are having problems, you can bet your bottom dollar that the rest of the cities are going to have even bigger problems and bigger issues.
Kevin Craig, a former councillor in Lambeth, your take on this?
Well, I think you have to look at this situation in phases, and the first phase is when is the government, supported by the police, going to take control back of our city? There is unquantifiable damage being done every day that people, businesses, ordinary citizens are being menaced and threatened by protesters who may have circumstances that exacerbate this sort of protest and criminality, but the circumstances can never justify it. When I was a politician elected in London, I represented the area where I grew up, and it didn't matter how poor you were, what your background was, you didn't do what we've seen happening on the streets in the last 3 days.
And that's
job number one.
Exactly, that's the point, isn't it?
That is the point, and the government just needs to first of all get a grip, and we've got to see in 24 hours that this has been stopped and dealt with, and then we can examine at length the socio-economic background of those involved. But first of all, bring some order to this fine city and stop allowing these rioters, who are a tiny percentage of us living in London, stop allowing them to hold us to ransom, give the police the resources they need, and then we can debate at length what's going on. But the picture going around the world of London at the moment is worrying, it's upsetting, it's disgraceful. There's no justification for it. The government needs to get a grip and start protecting its citizens. Otherwise, what's the point of it?
Steve Parks, you're talking about social injustice, but the riots weren't confined to poorer areas, were they? I mean, they were happening just round the corner from my house in Ealing, which is not a slum area, and Primrose Hill too.
And that's why I'm saying it's unprecedented. It would be difficult for the police to resource themselves throughout London, and this is where the organisers of this, what would be known as a mass demonstration, will know. If we go back to the student riots just a couple of months ago, we'll know that they don't choose their streets or the places that they riot. They can do it at will. They're very well organised, and also we saw the police hold off against the protesters in central London that were protesting against the student issues. What we've got here is the same, probably part of the same collective anarchic group that have tagged along to this to really create the criminality. This is a byproduct of what's happened, the looting, the robbing, the criminal damage is all part and parcel of the byproduct, and that has carried through from the 80s.
All right, well, Kevin Craig, I want you to speculate. It might be wrong of me to ask you to speculate. Who is wearing the hood who are the people on the streets? Who are the people looting and setting fire to buildings and burning cars and stealing? What ages and classes and ethnicities are they? Is that important in finding out who they are?
Is it important? I think the answer to your questions, you can just talk about what we've all seen. I mean, last night's rioting in Clapham took place just a mile away from where I work, and I've sent people down today to help with the clear up. But in terms of who was doing it, predominantly young people. I don't think their ethnicity is that big a question really for me, because in that part of London it's a very ethnically diverse population.
But you know what I'm getting at, Kevin, don't you? You know what I'm getting. I'm trying to sort of work out what the mentality is here, what the intent is, if there was any thinking.
Yeah. Well, there isn't. There's no. I'm so clear that there is no deep political philosophy at play here. There are some anarchists at work. We follow them on Twitter, and basically there were loads of young people at various scenes in London over the past 72 hours who were allowed, through failures thus far in policing, to do what they want. Tonight it's going to be different in London. There's an unprecedented number of police on the streets tonight. I think you're going to see a massive difference, and actually there had better be a massive difference, because we London citizens and business demand it.
A lot of observers, Steve Parks, are talking about the anger being directed specifically at the police. Is that anger directed at the police, or is it directed at the uniform, directed at authority?
Well, it's fairly unusual. If we go back in historical terms over the last 30 years, it was rare that anger would be directed at the police. Police may have got hurt, but they wouldn't be physically attacked like what seems to be happening now. So that's the unusual part of this. We did see police being set on fire in the student protests, and I have to go back to that because the police were wearing the wrong clothing and their uniforms were catching fire. So I think it's not something that the Command and Control Centre from Scotland Yard are going to be able to put their finger on for some time. They're going to be unaware of exactly where the hotspots are going to be next, and that will be difficult to orchestrate. Police carrier vans, these are the vans that people see with shield trained units in them that dash around the streets of London, stay behind streets when there's riots and marches going on, and for the most part are unseen. But there just will not be enough police on the ground that are riot shield trained to be able to deal with this. And that's what you're going to have here. Some sort of territorial force that are not your regular bobbies. Otherwise, police who are not trained in this kind of disruption are going to get caught in the middle of it.
Well, the Prime Minister has come back from Italy, come back from his holiday. David Cameron said he's recalling Parliament and promised to put 16,000 officers on the streets of London. That's what Kevin Craig was saying. He also wants more aggressive policing. Let's hear what he had to say.
As ever, police officers have shown incredible bravery on our streets in confronting these thugs. But it's quite clear that we need much more police on our streets, and we need even more robust police action. And it's that I've been discussing in Cobra this morning.
Now, Kevin Craig, more robust policing. Are the police, do you think, in 2011 too wary of what the Prime Minister calls robust policing? They want to use, or they're too frightened of robust policing. They want to use kid gloves, even though they are talking about rubber bullets.
Well, I don't think we're going to see rubber bullets in England, for example, this week. But police have been. My views are based on talking to members of Parliament from all sides in the past 24 hours and people outside any elites in terms of media and politics. And people do feel that police have been too reticent. They've said, look at how British police are famous the world over now for how they police football matches. Very strong, very assertive, with large numbers of people. People feel the police have been, as you say, too slow off the mark, and that they've allowed rioters to, quite frankly, get away with extremes of criminality, and they want to see action. And I think we've got a debate going here, because I think in 24 hours' time we will see a difference, because 16,000 police is a lot different to the 2,000 police that are normally in London on a Tuesday night. And we in London, our police have got to send messages that we can handle whatever comes at us. Social media is going to be here for this year, next year, for the next decade. We've got to show people we can run the Olympics, that we can, as we have in the past, dealt with terrorism. And the police have been under attack back in the Broadwater farm riots that were referred to a moment ago, when a policeman was tragically murdered. The poll tax riots at the end of Margaret Thatcher's prime ministerial period, where police were attacked in Trafalgar Square. This violence is not new. This government is just like all other governments, and has to show it can protect its people.
Well,
End of.
Let's go to Lee Jasper. Lee's an equality campaigner and an assistant to the former Mayor of London, Ken Livingstone, who we've already heard from Mr Livingstone talking about social dislocation. Lee Jasper, we're just talking about police using kid gloves because they're probably too frightened of confrontation. They're too frightened of race issues. Is that a scenario you recognise?
No, I think that's... I don't see any reticence in the Metropolitan Police Service in stop and searching black youth. That's increased year on year over the last 5 years, quite considerably. But we're at the highest level of stop and search on black youth we've ever seen in our history. And that accounts for the 75% representation of black men over between the ages of 18 and 35 who are represented on the National DNA database, such as the overwhelming number of black people who are stopped and searched. So I don't recognise that. I see policing taking place. I see disproportionate policing taking place in black community areas. And in fact, that creates the background and the backdrop to some of the criminal opportunities that we've seen of late with young people who are now brought up in a culture of routine stop and search, incivility in relation to the quality of that stop and search, disproportionate charging within the hands of the criminal justice system, who've come to the conclusion that the system is discriminating against them and they can't win. They're not getting any opportunities to take further education in colleges. The EMA grants in Whitmore, they can't afford to go to university. There's no houses for them to move into. Their parents struggle on low incomes.
So that's basically, you're saying that's not the issue. I want to hear from people.
No, well, you raised the issue.
Exactly. And you're saying that's not the story, which is interesting. And I'll come back to Steve Parks on that issue in just a moment. But first, I want to hear from people on the street.
What I couldn't understand was, where was the helicopter? Where were the police in riot gears? Where were the dogs and so on?
Like shoving it up their tops, running around like crazy. And then a few moments later, probably about 10 minutes after that, we were just all watching with amusement, really. The police turned up and they started running back and forth, so the police are sort of chasing one way, they go one way and the police are sort of chasing them back.
I just think emergency services response was awful. Now they're down here now, and where have they been?
Well, they burnt down and robbed everything. They're not going to stop. This is just started. This is just proven to the police. This is minor stuff. This is just showing what they can do.
Yeah, slow reaction. Certainly in Tottenham there was an early criticism of the police. But Steve Parks, the police are hypersensitive to race, certainly since the Macpherson report, and the police have surrendered some of the streets. Do you recognise that?
Yeah, no, well, I don't recognise it. No, I don't believe in no-go areas, especially in England, where we're trying to show the rest of the world that we can govern and secure the Olympic Games next year. We're not there yet, and the police will be out in force for that. And I rather suspect it will be the biggest security organised event that's ever gone on. However, I would say, in answer to the last person that was talking, we're really talking about the use of force. That will come from the Control and Command Centre. It's a directive from Scotland Yard. If the police are told not to use force, unfortunately, as a police officer on the street, rank and file police officers will not use force. If they're told to use force, then they can use as much force as necessary to arrest a suspect who may have committed a crime, or to prevent criminal damage or burglary or robbery, that kind of thing going on. It's a directive from Scotland Yard.
And that's a different tactic. I mean, I wonder, Steve Parks, are the police deliberately standing back because they're fearful, perhaps, of generating more rioting, and say, OK, we're going to let people get on with it, throw the stones, break the windows, set cars on fire, break into shops, and then we'll nick them afterwards on CCTV?
Yeah, I mean, they're going to lose control if they do that. I don't believe in that. I think there is a certain amount of use of force which can incite trouble. If you go back to the football matches of the 80s, 1985 in particular, where they were using horses that were running at youths and demonstrators. These demonstrators, they've got wires now, they've got equipment with them and they're prepared. And with the connections through the mobile phones they've got, it's possible that they could really do carnage.
That's exactly right.
I'm fairly sure here that
I want to sort of move on very quickly because of the time issue. I want to go back to Kevin Craig. First of all, Kevin, if you can respond to what we've just been talking about, but also I wonder to what extent are we seeing Twitter-based rioting? We're seeing, I mean, I certainly saw in the spring people organised on social media targeting certain streets. How much is social media being used to coordinate these attacks? And are the police aware of it enough?
Well, that's a very good point. It's being used massively. That if you follow these things on Twitter, you can see, for example, that the other night in Brixton, when a shoe retailer was targeted, it featured very heavily in Twitter feeds in the hours before that attack took place. So social media is being used a great deal. Anecdotal evidence last night from Clapham Junction showed that a lot of people have received text messages encouraging them to congregate at a certain time in a certain place to maximise the likelihood of trouble. So these are things that in the modern world, you know, our police and our government have just got to be able to deal with. They're not going away, but social media is definitely playing a part in these disturbances and their planning. And I would imagine that the police are now increasingly tuning into that, and intelligence. Overnight senior meetings at Scotland Yard, we were told, were focusing very much on intelligence gathering, and we expect that as citizens in London. We want to know that's happening so that we can be protected.
Well, now, Kevin, that this doesn't seem to be a community against the police, which it certainly was at times in the 80s. We've moved on from that, largely because of the efforts made by communities to engage with police and between each other, which is very good news. So does that mean the police can now change tactics and get tougher on the streets?
Yeah, I think they can. I mean, people, including, in fact, Lee Jasper, did great things in the 80s and 90s to bring together the police and community policing. And I saw that firsthand when I was an elected councillor in Lambeth. Compared to the early 1980s, we in Britain, and I'm proud to say, we've got a whole generation of black leaders now, including Diane Abbott, including Chuka Umunna, who I know well in Streatham in South London. So there are senior black politicians and leaders who are speaking up, and there isn't this divide of the community against the police. But it is fragile. You've got to constantly work very hard at policing communities in a way that ordinary people relate to. But over the last few days, it is ordinary people in London, black and white, who are suffering as much from the actions of these rioters as anybody else. They're the ones, it's people in poorer communities who suffer as much as anyone else from these riots, and they want their leaders speaking up for them and saying enough is enough.
In the brief time available, Steve Parks, what should the police attitude be in the coming weeks, in their attitude to the people on the street?
I think they've got to fight this on many levels. One, an intelligence level, one through the communication system that actually finds who the organisers are through the IP addresses, through the internet connections. I would deal with it in a very, very harsh manner on the street. Arrest straight away anybody found committing offences. Beware that CCTV evidence is really their primary tool for getting these people convicted once they've gone to court. But I would be, I'm old school, I'm afraid, and I'd be very, very harsh on dealing with this because this is indiscriminate and there are lots of people getting caught up in it.
Well, in 3 weeks' time, the Notting Hill Carnival is meant to take place. Will it still happen? That's a big question. And, as both guests have agreed, we're a year away from the Olympic Games in London. The questions we raised today will certainly have to be answered well before then. My thanks to my guests today, Steve Parks and Kevin Craig. And thank you so much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. We welcome your comments and suggestions. Please email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. From me, Stephen Cole, goodbye.